I'm 35, and I've always considered myself a pretty ordinary single mom. I live in a quiet neighborhood, work full-time as a nurse, and I've been raising my 8-year-old daughter, Emily, on my own since she was 2. Her dad was never in the picture after the breakup. His choice, not mine. Life has been steady, if not exciting. Emily is smart, imaginative, and has always had a bit of a whimsical personality. She loves drawing, writes little stories, and sometimes talks to herself while playing. I never saw any of that as strange. Kids do that. But a few weeks ago she started talking to someone named Olive. At first I thought it was cute. Another imaginary friend, perfectly normal. She'd have full conversations in her room, even pause during dinner and say things like, "Olive doesn't like green beans." I'd laugh it off until Olive started talking back. No, I didn't hear voices, but Emily would say things to me, specific, private things that no child should know, things I never told anyone, things I buried over a decade ago. It started small. One night, while tucking her in, she looked me dead in the eyes and asked if I ever missed the ocean. I froze, because I haven't been near the ocean in years, not since my early 20s. Not since the one thing I never talk about happened. She said Olive told her I used to love the water, but I don't go near it any because it hurts too much. The next day, she asked me if I remembered a girl named Nikki. My stomach dropped. Nikki isn't a common name, and it's not one Emily's ever heard me say, but Nikki was someone I knew once. Really knew. I haven't spoken her name out loud in 13 years. I barely speak those years at all. When I asked Emily who Olive was, she said, "Olive's her age, has long brown hair, and wears old clothes." That's how she described it. Old clothes, like the kind from a different. When I pushed further, asking where she met Olive, she just shrugged and said, "She came in through the wall." I thought maybe it was just her imagination being imaginative, but things kept getting stranger. Every day, Emily would tell me something new, something only someone who lived my past would know. Where I used to hide cigarettes as a teen, that I once dyed my hair purple for a concert, that I had a friend named Nate who died in a motorcycle crash the year I turned 20. Every single thing was real. I started checking the house, thinking maybe she'd found an old journal, an old box of keepsakes, something I forgot I'd stored away. But there was nothing. I've moved 3 times since those years, and I burned every trace of that life when I decided to start over. So how the hell does my 8-year-old know things I swore I'd take to my grave? And then last week, things got worse. Emily stopped talking to me, just like that. She avoids eye contact, doesn't hug me goodnight. She's cold, withdrawn. When I ask her what's wrong, she says nothing, but her eyes tell a different story. Yesterday she left a drawing on the kitchen table. It was of a girl, long brown hair, old-fashioned dress, standing beside Emily, and across from this, me, but not me, not as I am now. In the drawing, my face was covered in red, and under it, she wrote one sentence in shaky handwriting. "She knows what you did." I stared at them for hours. I couldn't throw it away, couldn't bring myself to crumple it or even fold it. I just kept looking at it, trying to convince myself it was meaningless scribble, some weird artistic outburst, but the words haunted. "She knows what you..." I didn't sleep that. I just laid in bed, clutching my phone, tempted to call someone, anyone. But who do you even tell something like this to? Hey, my daughter's imaginary friend might be some kind of ghost from my past, and she's telling my kid stuff I haven't even said out loud in a decade. Yeah, no, not happening. Emily barely acknowledged me the next morning. She got dressed in silence, wouldn't even eat the pancakes I made, her favorite. When I asked if she was mad at me, she just shook her head and said Olive told her to be careful around me, that I hurt people when they trust me. I almost dropped the plate I was holding. Those were Nikki's words. The last time we spoke, if you could even call it a conversation, she said almost the exact thing, and I'll never forget it, because it was the last time I ever saw her face before everything went to hell. At that point, I knew I wasn't going to get any peace until I faced it, whatever it was. So I did something I promised myself I'd never do again. I drove to the storage unit. It's about 30 minutes from where we live, tucked in an old industrial park. I hadn't opened it since before Emily was born. I rented it during the worst year of my life, after everything with Nikki and Nate and the beach house. I kept telling myself I'd go back and clean it out one day, but I never did. It was like stepping into a time capsule. Dust everywhere. The air smelled like mildew and regret. Most of it was junk, old furniture, clothes I didn't want to face, boxes I hadn't labeled for a reason. But I knew exactly what I was looking for. The red journal. I found it in the bottom of a box labeled kitchen, stuffed under a pile of cheap utensils and cracked mugs. I don't know why I put it there. Maybe I was scared someone would find it if I was too obvious. It was still intact. The leather cover was stiff, the pages yellowing, but it was all there. Every ugly memory I thought I could erase. I sat on the concrete floor and flipped through the pages, and there it was. Entry after entry about Nikki, about our friendship, about the fight, the beach house, the cliff, the storm, the night everything fell apart, and I ran. The night God, I still can't even write it out. I never told anyone what really happened that night. Everyone thought she disappeared during the storm, maybe drowned, maybe got lost in the woods. Her body was never found. There were whispers, rumors, but eventually it became just another tragic mystery. People moved on. I didn't. I lived with it. I built a new life over it like laying carpet over rotting floorboards. Thought maybe motherhood, distance, time, maybe all of that would be enough to cover it. And for a while, it was. But now this felt like the floorboards breaking open. Emily didn't just draw something creepy. She described Nikki's clothes, her voice, her words, the ones that were only ever between her and me. I put the journal back in the box, took a shaky breath, and drove home. When I got there, Emily was in her room talking, but not in her usual bubbly way. Her voice was low, almost like she was whispering secrets to someone, and when I peeked through the cracked door, I saw her sitting with her back to me, facing the wall. She was drawing again. I couldn't see what it was, but her hand was moving fast, like she couldn't get it out fast enough. I was about to say something, ask her who she was talking to, but then I heard her say, "She pushed her." That's what Olive said. She pushed her into the water. I backed away from the door, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. That's not something anyone should know. Not unless they were there. Not unless they were the one I pushed. The next morning felt different. The air in the house was heavy, like someone had left a window open in the middle of a storm. I couldn't hear any rain, but it felt like it was pouring inside my chest. I didn't even realize I'd slept in the clothes from yesterday until I saw myself in the mirror. Same jeans, same pale face, same haunted eyes. Emily didn't come out of her room for breakfast. She usually does. Even when she's upset, she'll sneak into the kitchen to ask if I've made eggs or pancakes, or at least cereal. But today, nothing. I tapped on her door and called her name. No answer. I opened it slowly, expecting her to be asleep or maybe playing under the covers. Instead, I found the room empty, completely empty. The window was wide open, curtain flapping in the wind. For one horrifying second, I thought she'd climbed out. But then I saw her. She was curled up in the closet. At first, I thought she was hiding. But when I crouched down, I realized she wasn't hiding. She was shaking. Her little arms were wrapped around her knees, face pale, eyes red from crying. I asked her what happened, and at first she wouldn't answer. Then, without looking at me, she whispered, "Olive said the water still remembered." It was like being punched in the gut. I didn't even know what that meant, but somehow I did. I remembered the water, the storm, the silence afterward. I remembered how cold it was, how dark, how it swallowed everything. I told Emily Olive wasn't real, that she was just a voice in her head. But she looked up at me, tears streaking down her face, and said, "She's more real than you are." And that's when I saw it. The drawing in her lap. It was the beach house, not the one she's ever seen not the one I've ever described. It was the beach house as it looked, with the porch light flickering, the storm clouds overhead, and on the edge of the cliff, a small figure with long hair standing behind. One girl was about to fall. The other had her arms stretched out, palms forward, pushing. I couldn't breathe. I asked Emily where she saw that place, if she dreamed it, or if someone showed her. She just shook her head and said, "Olive said you left her there. She was cold, and you left her." I don't know what came over me, but I snapped. I grabbed the drawing and tore it in half, right there in front of her. I told her to stop talking about Olive, that she wasn't allowed to say that name anymore, that I didn't want to hear another word. Emily didn't cry. She didn't scream or protest. She just looked at me like I was a stranger, like she didn't recognize me anymore. And then she whispered something I'll never forget. She said, "You're scared because you thought she drowned, but Olive says you didn't check." I dropped the paper. I didn't even realize I was shaking until I went to pick it up and saw my own hand trembling like a leaf, because she was right. I never checked. That night, after the fight, after Nikki went over the edge, I didn't go down to the water. I didn't call the police. I didn't scream for help. I panicked. I ran. I got in my car and drove until sunrise, and by the time I even considered turning back, it was too late. No body was ever found, just her sweater, caught on the rocks. I told everyone I didn't know what happened, that maybe she slipped, that the storm was too strong, the winds too high. People believed me, or maybe they didn't. Either way, they moved on. But now it feels like Nikki never left. Or maybe Olive isn't Nikki. Maybe Olive is something else. Someone watching, someone waiting. Because later that night, after Emily finally fell asleep, I went to close her window again and scratched into the windowsill. So faint I almost missed it. Were 5 words. "You never even looked down." I didn't sleep that night. How could I? After seeing that message carved into Emily's windowsill, "You never even looked down." I couldn't tell if my hands were cold because of fear or guilt, or both. I kept staring at the carving, running my fingers over it like I'd be able to feel the truth in the grooves. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't want her to know it was there. She's already afraid, already slipping further into whatever this is. I just stood in her room until she fell asleep, then moved to the hallway like some silent guard. But the truth is, I wasn't protecting her from anything. I was trying to keep something out. Or maybe in. Sometime after midnight, I heard the first sound. A knock. Not at the door. Inside the house. 3 soft taps. Somewhere downstairs. I froze. I thought maybe I was imagining it. But then came another knock. Louder. From the opposite side of the house. Like someone was moving. Room to room. I got up and moved carefully down the stairs. Everything was dark, but I could feel something had shifted in the air. It wasn't just colder. It felt wet. The floor, the walls, even the air around me, it all felt damp, like the house had been breathing in seawater. The kitchen light flickered on. Not all the way, just a soft blink, like someone had hit the switch and stopped halfway. Then it went off again. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, not sure whether to move forward or run back up. I didn't want to leave Emily, but something was calling me. I walked toward the kitchen, step by step, through the darkness, barefoot on the cold tiles. When I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The back door was wide open. The wind wasn't blowing. There was no storm outside, but the door was open, swinging slightly, like someone had just walked in, or out, and on the floor, there were footprints. Small ones, bare feet, wet, leading from the door to the middle of the kitchen floor, and then stopping, like the person just disappeared. I stared at them for a long time. They weren't Emily's. I checked, I measured. They were too long, too narrow, too wrong. I wanted to believe maybe she got up and went outside, that she had a sleepwalking episode, but I knew better. She was in her bed, asleep. I'd checked right before coming down. I followed the trail as far as it went, until I reached the end. And there, on the floor, was another drawing. Soaked, like it had been dipped in salt water. This one wasn't a house. It wasn't the cliff or the ocean. It was me. But not just me. Younger me. Wearing the same outfit I wore the night at the beach house. Jeans, hoodie, red shoes. And beside me, drawn in black crayon, was a figure with no face. Long hair, arms outstretched. She was pointing, not at me, at something behind me. I dropped the drawing and turned. There was nothing there. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the living room, lights on, the wet drawing still on the floor beside me. I kept telling myself to call someone, a priest, a therapist, anyone, but I didn't, because part of me still thinks I deserve this. The next morning, Emily didn't say a word. Not even a glance. Just got dressed, picked up her backpack, and waited by the door. But as she walked out, she paused, looked over her shoulder, and said, "Olive says it's time to go back." I told myself I wasn't going. I told myself Emily was just talking nonsense, echoing things from TV or books or God knows what. That Olive was just a figment, a stress response, a leftover ghost of the lies I buried in my early 20s. But later that day, I caught Emily packing. She had taken one of my old tote bags and stuffed it with her favorite hoodie, her sketchbook, a flashlight, and a single apple, like she was preparing for a journey, like she knew exactly where she was going, and why. When I asked her what she was doing, she didn't lie. She just said, "Olive wants to go home. You have to take us." And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I said, okay. Maybe I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. Or maybe part of me knew this wouldn't stop until I faced it head on. Whatever it was, that same night I packed an overnight bag, buckled Emily into the car, and drove. Back to the coast. Back to that place I'd spent 13 years pretending didn't exist. The roads hadn't changed much. The same gas station sat just off the highway. The same rusted sign still hung at the edge of town, half covered in ivy. The beach house. Well, I wasn't even sure if it was still standing. I hadn't dared to look it up all these years, but I remembered exactly where it was. The final stretch of road was mostly dirt now, overgrown and uneven. Emily was silent in the back seat, hugging her bag. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror and asked if she was okay. She didn't answer, but her eyes weren't scared. They were calm, as if she'd been here before. The beach house stood exactly where I left it, a little older, a little more broken, but still there. The porch was sunken in on one side. The windows were boarded up. The path down to the water was almost completely swallowed by weeds, but I could still see it. The cliff, the one I'd never gone back to, the one I used to dream about, waking up in a cold sweat, always convinced someone was standing at the edge. Emily stepped out of the car and walked toward the house without hesitation. I scrambled to catch up. The moment we stepped inside, it hit me. The smell. Not just the mildew and salt, but something familiar. The way it smelled the last time we were all here. I saw the ghosts of that night in everything. The dented lamp, the faded couch, the burn mark on the carpet from when Nikki dropped her cigarette. It was all frozen in time. Emily wandered through the living room like she'd been there 100 times. She touched the wall beside the fireplace, paused at the hallway, then walked straight to the back patio door. She looked at me and said, "She's out there." I didn't want to go. Every nerve in my body screamed to turn around, drive home, and pretend none of this ever happened, but I followed her. The grass had grown tall, nearly waist-high, but the cliff's edge was still visible. The wind was stronger here, and the sound of the waves crashing below made my chest tighten. Emily walked right to the edge and sat down, not dangerously close, but close enough that I couldn't breathe. I asked her what she saw. She didn't speak. She pointed. Down below, on the jagged rocks near the base of the cliff, something white was caught in a piece of fabric, a shirt or a sweater. I knew what it was. The sweater they'd found. The only piece of Nikki anyone ever. Emily turned to me, her face pale but steady, and said, "She's still waiting for—" I didn't ask who. I didn't need to, because just then a shadow moved across the rocks. Slow, deliberate, and it wasn't mine. I couldn't look away. That shadow, it wasn't imagined. It wasn't a trick of the light or some drifting cloud. It moved with intention. It watched. Emily didn't move from the edge. She just sat there, legs crossed as if the crashing waves below and the ghostly presence nearby were completely normal. I asked her if she could see it too. She nodded. Then she said something. The air around me felt 10 degrees colder. She says you lied. She didn't fall. You were angry. You said she ruined everything. And just like that, I was back there. Not physically, but in my head. Back in that storm. Back in that night. I remembered yelling. I remembered Nikki crying. I remembered that sick, dizzy feeling in my stomach when she said she was going to tell everyone about Nate, about what we did, about the secret we thought we'd buried along with him. Nikki wasn't just my friend. She was the last person who still held the truth about what happened to Nate, and that night, I was terrified. She was unraveling. We were all unraveling. She kept saying she saw him, talked to him, that he wanted the truth out, that she couldn't live with the guilt, and I couldn't lose everything. I didn't mean to push her. I didn't, but I did. In the middle of our argument, when she grabbed my arm and screamed that she was going to the police, I shoved her, just to make her let go. She slipped on the wet grass. She went over, and I froze. I didn't climb down. I didn't scream for help. I didn't even check to see if she was breathing. I stood there, heart pounding, and listened to the ocean eat her alive, and then I ran. Now, 13 years later, I was standing in the exact same spot, my daughter beside me, the ghost of Nikki, or whatever she had become, watching from below, and I couldn't run this time. Emily stood up and reached for my hand. Her fingers were freezing. I asked if she was scared. She shook her head and whispered, "She's not angry, and she's just sad." The waves crashed again, louder this time, and then a voice. Not a whisper, not in my head, but a voice, low, wet, and hollow, rising up from the cliffside, like it was coming through the rocks themselves. "You buried me in silence." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Emily stepped forward again, but I pulled her back, clutching her close. I told her we had to go. We had to leave, but before I could turn around, someone, appeared behind us. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't feel wind, just that overwhelming sensation of being watched, and when I turned, I saw her, standing half in shadow, half in moonlight, hair matted with seaweed, skin pale and soaked, eyes wide and black as the ocean, not angry, not vengeful, just broken. And then she spoke again. "You didn't even say goodbye." I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Nikki, or what was left of her, stood just a few feet away. Her soaked figure didn't shimmer or float. She looked solid, real, more real than she had any right to be after 13 years in the ocean. She didn't. She stood at my side like she expected this, like she had known this moment was coming. I could feel her grip tightening around my hand, grounding me in place, keeping me from bolting like I did all those years ago. I looked at Nikki, if I could still call her that, and finally spoke. 3 words, my voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." It didn't feel like enough, because it wasn't. I dropped to my knees, right there at the edge of the cliff, the same spot where I'd shoved her, the same patch of land that still held the truth like a wound that never healed, and I confessed, out loud, to the waves, to Nikki, to Emily. I told them everything, how I met Nate in college, how we fell into a reckless spiral of drugs, debt, and secrets, how one night things went too far. Nate overdosed in that beach house, and Nikki and I, panicked, scared, selfish. We dragged his body out during the storm and left him in the woods, staging it like he'd gone missing. We swore we'd never speak of it again, but Nikki couldn't handle the guilt. She started seeing things, hearing Nate's voice. She thought he was haunting her, pushing her to tell the truth, and that night, when she confronted me, she was done hiding. I wasn't, and in that blind panic, when she screamed that she was going to the police, I shoved her, not hard, not to kill her, but hard enough. I told myself it was an accident. I told myself it wasn't murder, but I never told the truth, until now. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. I didn't look at Emily. I couldn't. I didn't know what she'd think of me after this, but I kept going. I had to say it all. When I finished, the silence was deafening. No wind, no waves, just stillness. I dared to look up. Nikki was still there, but she was different. The seaweed was gone. Her skin looked dry. Her face, softer, younger, like the version of her I used to know before everything turned ugly. She looked at Emily, then at me, and for a moment her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear anything. Then she turned away and walked toward the edge of the cliff, not over it, into it, like she was dissolving into the land, into the rocks, into the water that had kept her secret for 13 long years. And then she was gone. Just gone. Emily knelt beside me and whispered, "She's not stuck anymore." I asked her how she knew that. She just said, "Olive told me," and then she asked if we could go home. We didn't speak the entire drive home. Emily stared out the window the whole way, humming softly under her breath. It wasn't a tune I recognized, but it made my skin crawl. Slow, repetitive, almost like a lullaby, but off somehow. I didn't ask her about it. I was too busy trying to hold myself together. I thought once I said everything, once I faced it, it would be over. That letting the truth out would be enough to send Nikki, or Olive, or whatever was haunting us, back to wherever she came from, and for a day or two, it felt like it worked. Emily started smiling again. She asked for pancakes. She asked if we could go to the park. She drew a picture of a tree with 2 girls under it, smiling. I assumed one was her and the other was Nikki. Maybe this was her way of saying goodbye. I started to breathe again. I even unpacked my overnight bag. But then, on the 3rd night back, it happened. I woke up around 3 a.m., heart racing, with no idea why. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I got up to check on Emily. She wasn't in her bed. I found her in the hallway, standing barefoot in front of the bathroom mirror, just staring, not at herself, at the reflection. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. I walked over slowly, softly calling her name. She didn't respond, and her shoulder. She jumped like I'd yanked her from somewhere far away. I knelt down, told her it was okay, that everything was fine now, that Nikki was at peace. That's when she looked at me and my stomach, because she didn't look. She looked afraid. Then she said, "That wasn't Nikki." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" She shook her head. "Olive isn't Nikki. Nikki left. Olive stayed. She says there's another one that comes after." I didn't understand. I thought Olive was Nikki, just a softened version, the childlike ghost left behind. But Emily said no. She said Olive was her own person. She said Olive was trying to protect her, that Olive had come to warn her about something worse. Someone worse. Someone who lives behind the mirror. Someone who wants to take her place. I felt a chill race up my spine. I looked at the mirror, heart pounding. There was nothing there, but Emily wouldn't go near it anymore. She asked to sleep in my bed that night. I didn't say no, but after she fell asleep, I stood in front of the mirror myself, waiting, daring it to move, and just before I turned away, I swear I saw it, a second reflection, standing a step behind mine, not moving, not blinking, just watching. The next morning I covered every mirror in the house, every single one, bathroom, hallway, bedroom, towels, sheets, old blankets, anything I could find. Emily didn't ask questions. She just watched me do it, silently, like she knew, like she'd been waiting for me to finally catch up. I kept telling myself it was symbolic, that I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something had shifted. Whatever this was, it hadn't ended with Nikki. That was just the beginning. That night, it returned, not with a voice, not with a dream, but with a smell. The house filled with the scent of seawater and ash. I checked every sink, every pipe, every drain, but nothing was leaking. There was no ocean anywhere near us, but it smelled like it was pouring in through the walls. Then the whispering started, not from Emily's room, from mine. It wasn't coming from the window, or under the bed, or the closet. It was coming from behind the mirror, the one I had already covered. I stood there, frozen, as the whispering grew louder. I couldn't understand the words. It wasn't English. Not quite. It sounded like something older, something cracked and wet and wrong. Then something tapped from the other side of the glass. Once, twice, 3 times. I backed away. I didn't even want to uncover it, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand moved like it wasn't mine. I pulled the sheet off, and the mirror was black. Not dark, not reflective, black, like it was filled with smoke or ink or tar. I couldn't see my reflection at all, just that shifting, swirling blackness. And then, slowly, something started to emerge from it. A hand, pale, small, pressing against the inside of the glass like it wanted out. And then, a face. But it wasn't mine, and it wasn't Nikki's. It was Emily's, but twisted, wrong. Her eyes were sunken, her mouth too wide, her head tilted slowly to one side, like a predator observing prey through a cage. And then it smiled. I dropped the sheet, screamed, and slammed the mirror face down against the wall. The glass didn't shatter. It warped, like it had turned to liquid for a second. Emily came running in. She asked what I saw. I didn't know how to explain it, but she nodded, like she already understood. She said, "That's not Olive, that's the other." I asked her what the other was. She said Olive told her it lives in reflections. It waits, it copies, and then it replaces. I stared at her, heart racing. She looked back at me and whispered, "It wants to be me." I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat by Emily's bed watching her breathe, trying to figure out how we'd gone from a beach house secret to this. A haunted mirror, a ghost child, and something hiding in the reflections that wanted to steal my daughter. I kept thinking, maybe I imagined it. Maybe stress broke me. Maybe grief is just wearing a different face this time. But in my bones, I knew better. The next day, I did something I hadn't done since she was born. I called her school and told them she wouldn't be coming back for a while. I didn't know what excuse I gave them. Something about family matters. Something vague enough not to raise alarms. Emily didn't protest. She just nodded and kept drawing in that same sketchbook. But now, the drawings weren't of houses, or girls, or cliffs. They were of mirrors. Dozens of them. In each one, 2 faces looked back. One hers, and one that looked almost like hers. Almost. That night, it made its move. I woke to a scream. Emily's. I rushed down the hallway, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Her door was wide open, her blankets on the floor. But she wasn't there. The bathroom light was on, and the mirror, the one I'd covered earlier, was uncovered. I stepped inside, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, because Emily was standing in front of the mirror, but so was the other. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't mirroring her. It was moving on its own. It blinked at the wrong time, smiled when she wasn't, and then it reached forward, from inside the glass. I screamed and grabbed Emily, pulling her back just as the mirror cracked, from the inside out. Long spiderweb lines raced across the surface like something underneath was struggling to burst through. The lights flickered, the air went ice cold, and then, without warning, the glass shattered. But nothing came out. No body, no smoke, just a sudden stillness. Emily collapsed into my arms sobbing. She whispered, "It tried to take me." Olive stopped it. I looked at the shards on the floor, and in one of them, for the briefest moment, I saw her, Olive, not soaked or screaming or angry, just standing there, calm, watching, and then she was gone. We left the house the next day. I didn't take much, just enough clothes and money to stay with my sister for a while. I didn't tell her everything, just enough for her to know that Emily needed space, quiet, and maybe some help. I hired someone to tear out all the mirrors in the house. Every single one. We don't own any now. No makeup mirrors, no rear view. I even took the reflective screen protector off my phone. People call it paranoia. I call it survival. Emily hasn't spoken to Olive since that night. She says Olive left when the mirror broke, that she was never meant to stay, only protect, and that whatever the other was, it's locked out now, for good, she says. But sometimes I catch her looking too long into windows, into puddles, into her spoon at breakfast, and once, just once, I heard her whisper, "I know you're still watching."